So this is a conversation with Lara Bitar. She's the founding editor of The Public Source, an excellent, independent and left-leaning media outlet based in Lebanon. Lara and I spoke about The Public Source, about the importance of critical journalism in Lebanon today, and we also spoke about what she called the evaporated euphoria, which is a reference to, in her words, this brief moment of euphoria that a lot of people experienced during the October 17 moment. Obviously, in the aftermath of the August explosion in Beirut, quite a lot of questions have since been raised that were not asked before. A lot of people are trying to leave, a lot of people have given up, and there are quite a few people as well, we should say, that still think that there are certain things that we can do. This isn't really a conversation about whether one should have hope or not. I think these are very personal conclusions. I just wanted to have Lara on because she provides a very interesting and critical perspective on what's going on. For the rest, I just leave it up to you. So as usual, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at FireTheseTimes, and if you like what I do, please consider supporting this project with only $1 a month on Patreon on buymeacoffee.com, and you can also do so directly on PayPal if you prefer. Patreon is for monthly, PayPal is for one-offs, and Buy Me a Coffee has both options. And if you cannot donate, you can still help by reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Please also remember to share with your friends and family if you find any of these episodes interesting. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Lara Bitar, and I'm the founding editor of The Public Source.
So we'll be talking about a number of things. Obviously, we'll be talking about The Public Source and like how it came about. It came about basically in the momentum of the October uprising / revolution, and since then you guys have been doing quite a lot of interesting stuff. So to kind of kick off this conversation, I'll first ask about The Public Source, and then I'll ask you like more personal questions if that's okay. How did The Public Source start? What's kind of the genesis behind it? If you can basically tell listeners about it, that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people think that The Public Source was born out of the October popular uprising, but it wasn't. We were already working on this project months before October 17 happened. And the main idea behind it was we realized that there was a need to have an independent media organization that's based in Beirut, that's primarily operated by local journalists and local editors who have a very deep understanding of the situation. Our main focus initially was investigative journalism. That project was on hold for a little bit as we were pursuing different stories, and we're hoping to kick that off in the coming weeks. But when the October 17 moment happened, we felt this need to respond to these events that were unfolding in front of us. So we launched the platform with something we called the Dispatches from the October Revolution, which was primarily a section dedicated to commentary, analysis, reflection from people who are engaged in different struggles. So we made a list of the topics that we were most interested in. And the way the site is sectioned is quite different from a traditional media organization or a traditional paper. So we don't focus on news, we don't report on what's happening on a daily basis, but there are key issues and key topics that we are interested in looking into, investigating, and also at the same time agitating for or against. I'll give you a couple of examples. We focus a lot on topics related to capitalism and neoliberalism. We're also very keen on talking about labor and the role that labor is playing in the uprising and otherwise, different types of organizing that's taking place, some of the challenges, what does solidarity look like, what does it mean to have a network based on mutual aid, And of course, like I said, agitation and mobilization is one of the key issues that we've tackled with our dispatches. And we continue to branch out in a lot of different places, tackling a lot of different issues. So going back to this primary idea of conducting investigations into the different crises that the country has been enduring over the past 3 or 4 decades. On our platform, we host a couple of different whistleblowing tools. One is Secure Drop, which is a little bit more complex to use. The other is Wire, which is an app that anybody can download on their phone. So we wanted to give potential whistleblowers or people with information that they believe serves the public interest or is in the interest of the public to know of, a way to share that information or these documents in a secure way and anonymously. So Sarrib, in parentheses, Ya Shabi. So the Shabi was added, it was kind of inspired by the October moment. But Sarrib is a whistleblowing platform that we hope eventually, once people get more acquainted with the public source and with the kind of work that we're doing, that would help us contribute to processes of accountability. So beyond the dispatches, the whistleblowing platform, eventually the Chronicles of the Crisis, which are the investigations. On our site, we also have Comic Turn, which is a platform for politically charged fictional and non-fictional comics. We launched our first comic during the lockdown, and it was called Karantina Lina, and it was a kind of a look into life under quarantine. And right now we're working on a couple of different comic strips. One will be called Al Murasila, and that one is almost done. And that's basically it for the public source. Beyond the content that you can see on the site, the structure of the organization is very essential to how we operate and a key component of the organization. So we're founded on principles of non-hierarchy, voluntary and temporary association, and mutual aid. Once a new team member joins within 3 months, if everything is going well and the person is interested, they can join our collective, which is a collective that runs the public source. And what that means is that they will have equal decision-making power. They will be consulted on all of the different editorial and non-editorial decisions that we take. Everybody who works with us is privy to, and not just the people who work with us, but anybody in general is privy to where we get our funding from, how it's being allocated. We, at the public source, we believe that labor should be compensated and should be compensated fairly. So we're very transparent about that as well. We believe whether it's reporting as a journalist or whether you're writing just as an author, that you should be compensated for that labor. This is just a small glimpse into our structure and into how we operate. And I think it's very clear that our editorial line or our editorial policies and direction in general is left-leaning. We're anti-capitalists, obviously, anti-imperialists, and we strive to forge bonds with the communities whose struggles we report on, and we try to be as diligent as possible while doing that work.
But I guess it's inevitable to sort of ask you, if that's okay, like how have you seen the October uprising impact your work? And I guess more recently as well, the devastating explosion that we saw in Beirut. How has that been impacting your work, whether personally, feel free to talk as much as you want, of course, or the public source in general?
It's been very, very challenging, to say the least. And I think, just in general, anyone you talk to in Lebanon, they'll share the same story within variations of it. It's impossible to plan. It's impossible to have long-term goals because every single morning we wake up and it's a new reality and we're confronted with a new situation and new things to deal with. So for the public source, and that's, it's the same for the public source. I've had to redo our editorial planning at least 4 or 5 times. Every time I think that, all right, we're set and this is what we're going to be doing, and we set our editorial calendar for the coming months, we're thrown a curveball, just like everybody else that's working and living in this country. But it's also been very rewarding, and the response that we got even before we launched the site, because we had a soft launch a few months before, because it was truly a collaborative effort that made this project come together. We consulted a lot of different journalists and organizations, and basically we knocked on the door of so many people that we respected to share this idea with them and get feedback. Of course, we consulted with community, people who are part of movements, to be able to, make this project come together. So it was very important for this process to be as collaborative as possible, because obviously we reject this very top-down approach, and we try to do that in our work and also in some of the work that happens in the background.
And your role within the public source is as an editor, right?
So I'm the editor of the public source, which means I do a lot of the stuff that's not very fun. And a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the fundraising, obviously editing, that goes without saying. But I'm basically the person who kind of put this vision together and helped materialize it. And I'm not a journalist, though I'm often mistaken for one, or a reporter. A lot of my work consists of commissioning articles, thinking of what should be covered and from which angle. Granted, of course, we work with established authors, but also we work with young and inexperienced authors. And our editorial process is one that's built on care. There's a lot of back and forth. We do several rounds of revisions, and I'm not the only editor on the platform. There's a couple of other editors. The one editor who's working with me now is Cynthia Isa. And so we've kind of developed really what I can call a practice of care in our editing process. We're in touch with the authors, we have long phone calls, we refine the ideas together, and then we're also a part of the writing process as well. So that's for the most part what I do at the public source. A lot of the strategic planning, long-term vision setting, and making sure on a daily basis that the values that we set for ourselves are actually being respected. And we hold ourselves to a very high standard. And of course we make mistakes, and of course we will continue to make mistakes, but we aspire to hold ourselves accountable, of course, but also to a much higher standard than that is usually accepted in this industry.
One of the first episodes that I had on this podcast was with Banshi Yimer, and for those who don't know, Banshi Yimer was a former domestic, she's a former domestic worker who did live in Lebanon for almost a decade, and she founded, alongside other Ethiopian migrant workers, she founded this group called Enyalenya, which works with migrant domestic workers in Lebanon and Ethiopia, and some of them are based in the diaspora and so on. And one of the reasons why I found out about her was through the public source. And it gave me a very good indication of the angle that the public source was going to take even back then. I think the first article that she wrote was in February or something. It's something that I actually genuinely appreciate, including that you guys actually linked up the Lebanese revolution with the need to tackle the kafala system, which many people have been trying to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Banshi's piece is a prime example of, let's call them our ethics and our principles, and how we adhere to them. Of course, now it's much more common to hear people speak against the sponsorship system, kafala. People are much more aware of, how cruel and inhumane it is. But when we were looking to commission a piece on this topic, it was very important for us to have somebody who has experienced and lived through and survived this cruel system to be able to articulate what her experience was like and to speak against it. And she spoke against it very forcefully. And Banshi later wrote a second piece during the coronavirus lockdown that spoke about what she was one of the first people to warn of, the starvation that we later saw happen to migrant workers who were stranded on the street or who were just basically thrown out to the street by their employer sponsor. And very early on, she was warning that there's a potential of that happening, and then later we saw that it did actually occur as she had expected. So it's these types of perspectives that are very important for us to give space to and to treat respectfully and to continue to continue to give space to, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of the general coverage by I'll just call them the mainstream media, I guess, but like the media in Lebanon in general, whether it's the main newspapers or the main outlets, what are some stuff that they tend to do wrong, even when they're well-meaning, even in some cases where the individuals might be well-meaning? But what are certain angles that they just don't focus on enough? What are certain issues that they simply don't highlight enough? What don't they investigate enough? And so on and so forth, that outlets such as the public source, for example, can actually can do and will hope to do, obviously, in the near future?
That's a super broad question because there's so much to critique in the local media landscape, and of course the foreign organizations that operate in Lebanon. So it would be hard to pinpoint to just one issue. I think what the public source tries to do, and especially in these investigations that we've been pursuing over the past few months, is to pursue stories without having a political agenda. The mainstream media organizations in Lebanon have done on many occasions good reporting, solid investigations, but they're always bound by the political agenda of whichever political party or political figure is funding them. That's kind of a key difference in how we operate, as opposed to, let's say, Jadid or any other TV channel that does similar types of investigations. Yeah. No, that's a good point. The questions are sometimes purposefully vague to let the open the floor, essentially. But yeah, it's something that I've personally found it difficult to even explain it to myself, let alone explain it to other people about how the media system actually functions in Lebanon. Because as you mentioned, there are pretty decent investigations that are done. We are relatively lucky in that respect compared to some of our friends in the regions, obviously. But the limitations can be pretty glaring. And one thing that I did appreciate, I mentioned the example of Banshi just as an example, is that these, from what I can tell from my vantage, in the sense, from my point of view, I would say what the public source is actually actively trying to it's basically self-aware. And I guess this is what you mentioned in the practice of actually caring. Yeah, sometimes we're a little bit too self-aware. The process is very tedious, and every piece passes through a number of people, and then the translators, copy editors. We discuss them in our editorial meetings. So it's quite a long and tiresome process that we've kind of committed ourselves to in order to ensure that we are meeting the standard that we set ourselves up against. But to briefly touch on the question that you were asking earlier, and not to be super reductive, because it would be hard to talk about the media landscape in Lebanon in general and do that justice in just a few sentences. But a lot of the reports, at least that you see on television, on channels like LBC or New TV, and some of these talk shows that are held late at night or that are broadcast late at night, they tend to be very exploitative, very sensationalist. Even when they're highlighting a particular issue that might have, some worth, and it could be presented in a particular manner, it's done in an always, or most of the time, in a manner that's very unethical. It's borders on vulgarity. It's crude. It's meant to exploit the tears of someone who lost a beloved. It's basically just meant to satisfy a particular audience that wants these types of sensational stories that have a lot of scandal and that have these plots that are a little bit outlandish, and it's like watching a movie really, and not a report on real grievances and real issues that are happening in the country. But that's, I guess, what sells. So we do a lot of, so our articles are kind of long, and I get complaints. It's too long, I couldn't read all of it, too much is going on right now. Why don't you write shorter articles so we can understand what's happening without needing to spend so much time? And of course, I take these kinds of comments into consideration. And because, of course, if our material is not being read, then what's the point? But at the same time, in order to do these stories justice, we have to go into some depth at the very least. I mean, these are not 10,000 word articles. These are for the most part between 1,200 to 2,000, sometimes 3. But we really feel that we need to be able to explore these topics in much more depth in order to be able to understand how to resolve some of these issues, in order to kind of elevate the types of conversations that we have, whether it's about environmental justice or about migration and displacement, when we talk about infrastructure, any of these issues that matter a lot to us, we feel the need and an obligation to do justice to them. And over the next few weeks and months, we're going to be experimenting with different types of tackling some of these issues. Be it through short videos, we'll be doing a few more photo essays, so a little bit more, a few more visuals that we hope will be able to captivate the reader and convince them that this is a text that's worth reading and worth investing a few extra moments in.
I'm trying to. No, I guess there's no easy way of asking that question, but just so that the episode is also kind of like internally coherent, so I don't ask listeners to necessarily have listened to some of the previous episodes. Can you tell us a bit about? Okay, well, I'm asking you this in advance, knowing that it's pretty much impossible to answer, but I will try and contribute a bit as well. But like, how is it even possible to describe this, even this year alone, like even if we forget the October uprising and the couple of months after that, how would you even describe the level of difficulties that, very broadly speaking, and again, I know that this is very difficult to do, Lebanon has, or people who are living in Lebanon right now have been going through? As of now, we're in mid-September. It's been a month and a half roughly since the explosion. Since then, there's been like 3 or 4 fires, which has been mind-boggling in itself. And obviously, this doesn't even take into account, or this is in addition to the pandemic, the global pandemic, COVID-19, and the economic crisis, which preceded October and has since worsened, obviously, in 2020. To start, again, I know that you guys started before, but like most of the articles have been happening since. To actually work in that context is extremely challenging, to say the least. Maybe this is a very subjective question. I'll ask it this way, but how are you even coping with this? And for those who may just know general headlines, but not much. What can you tell them about these past few months?
Sure. I'll answer the first question first about us specifically. Um, so when we were conceptualizing this project, we kind of anticipated this moment. Of course, we could have never imagined that there was going to be an explosion of this magnitude, nor did we predict that there was going to be a popular uprising. But there were a few things that we knew for a certainty. And that a deep financial crisis that could potentially lead to economic collapse was a near certainty. And we kind of wanted to anticipate that moment and to be able to report on its ramifications, how it's impacting people materially and otherwise. And also at least to attempt to hold those in power responsible for the catastrophic state of affairs in the country. For example, we knew that there was going to be harsh austerity measures that were going to be imposed. This is, pre WhatsApp and pre all of that kind of conversation that happened then. These things, everybody who was following up on what was going on in the country kind of knew that this was to be expected. So we couldn't, or at least I couldn't in good conscience, have prepared for this project, and I had spent about almost 6 months just churning out proposal after proposal, writing grant after grant, making the case for this project, its value, its worth at this particular moment, and the role that it could potentially play. And of course, we've only been out for a few months, and we are nowhere near our potential, but we're growing slowly and gradually and very steadily, I think. So because of all of that, there was no way for us to just throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, this is so difficult, and we're going to take a nap for a few months and then get back to work. So we had to continue doing this work that we thought was essential. We just had to constantly be refining it and revisiting what our priorities were, what our focus should be on, and so on and so forth. As for Lebanon in general, of course, this past year, almost year, since October 17, 2019, has been incredibly difficult on all fronts. Like I was saying earlier, every morning you wake up to a new reality. And since the blast on August 4, it's felt like the entire city is in a daze. No one's okay. There's no one's putting up a facade anymore. Anyone you would ask, at least in the first 2 or 3 weeks after the blast, you'd ask anyone on the street or any friend or any family member, how are you doing? The answer was always the same, I'm not okay. And people would just nod in agreement but not really know what to say. And because we've been hit by incident after incident since the blast, whether it's fires, whether it's the constantly reoccurring garbage crisis, whether it's clashes between different political parties, whether it's rumors of security issues or of a looming security situation, reports of the return of assassinations and bombings, whether it's power cuts, electricity cuts. The infrastructure of the country is collapsing in front of our very eyes, and we're sitting in the middle of it watching helplessly. And it feels like no matter what we do, eventually we're going to get swept away. So that's I hope I was able to at least answer your question a little bit, but really that's how it felt. Every day it's a new challenge that's presented to you. We haven't had the chance or the space to properly mourn after August 4. I don't know anyone who's had the chance or the space to process what happened. I feel like a lot of people are still under shock. And of course, not to discount, the thousands of people whose homes were destroyed, people who have been rendered homeless, people who have lost their businesses, people who have lost loved ones. And the ruling class is still operating as if nothing has happened. It's business as usual. It's fights over who gets which ministry. Still pursuing, and now the loan from the World Bank was halted, but still pursuing projects like the Bisri Dam. It felt like a huge slap in the face to have had this catastrophe happen, and for the ruling class to continue to operate and it's really the only way that it knows how to. And it feels really surreal to just be going to work and to be doing normal things, and now it feels like there's a slow and gradual return to normalcy. People going to bars or to restaurants and socializing and doing things that we used to do before August 4. But at the same time, no one is okay. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. It's just, it's difficult, and this brief moment of euphoria that a lot of people experienced during the October 17 moment has evaporated. Some of the organizers and activists that were at the forefront of that movement are trying to leave. By any means possible, whether it's to pursue an education even though they graduated like 15 years ago from college, and I will just get a master's, we'll do anything as long as we can get a visa out of this country. It's a hellhole, really, and constant and never-ending interruptions to life in general. Power cuts, relentless. One day, there's a strike here, then a strike there, and these are not strikes, obviously, that are to our advantage. These are the strikes that companies that have a monopoly over a certain product or over a certain service engage in order to raise the prices on said good or product. One day you'd have to run to fill up your car with fuel because you know that maybe next day or the day after you won't be able to do so. Bakeries going on strike, gas stations, every day it's something.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for answering. I think that actually does answer it pretty well. It's what I only did one other episode. It was right after the Beirut blast. It was with Lina Munzer, and obviously it was more immediate, right? It was like 3 days after. So the I am not okay is something that strikes me as very, like, actually overwhelming. I've been writing. I recently finished writing a essay that will be up on Mangal Media at some point. I think in the next few days, we'll see. But it's really about that, like kind of going into this notion of resiliency and whether we're really at the point where it actually makes sense to talk about it, or whether we're actually just broken and we need to recognize that. And it's more of a personal thing. I'm not actually making any argument for or against anything. But it is something that every single person I know who's in Beirut or in Lebanon Lebanese or non-Lebanese, and including many Lebanese who are abroad, there is a very distinct feeling or distinctive feeling of exhaustion, PTSD to various extents, and just, yeah, I mean, those two on their own are extremely difficult to deal with already. And obviously that's in addition to anything else that they may have already been dealing with before August 4th. And this is the, I really appreciated when Lena was on, I really appreciated the fact that she said, like, point blank, that these guys are not gonna get any accountability, that there's not gonna actually be anything that goes after them. And of course she's right, and we knew this. There was a moment of hope, and I didn't want to crush anyone's hope or anything like this, but it did feel, for me personally, from the beginning, that nothing's going to happen to these guys. And I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that even some organizers and frontline activists and whatnot are trying to leave. I'm really not surprised, and I don't blame them, obviously. I mean, here I am talking from Switzerland, right? I guess I wanted to ask you, sorry, yeah.
But I just wanted to add one thing on that point. Not only will no one be held accountable, but the feeling that I've had ever since the blast is that for those of us who survived, we are faced with attempted murder on a daily basis. The state is trying to kill us slowly in a variety of different ways. Be it pollution, be it expired products, food products, expired medicine, the condition of our roads. It just feels really that on a daily basis, our lives are under threat. And I think that feeling is shared by a lot of people who lived through the blast. And who feel this sense of desperation, and that surviving it does not mean that this is the end of this war that they've been waging against us over the past few decades. This was maybe a momentary acceleration of this war, and then the slow war continues as it has been for so many years. And this feeling of not knowing whether or not tomorrow you will make it out alive at the end of the day, based on the conversations that I've had with friends and acquaintances, I think is shared by many people. I was talking to an author. I was commissioning a piece from this morning, and we were setting the deadline in 2 weeks, and then we left off the conversation by saying, well, if we live for another 2 weeks, then yes, that would be the deadline. But there's no certainty that we're going to continue to survive, in the near future, that our lives could be lost in the blink of an eye for whatever stupid and insignificant reason. And I felt, and I've always felt that way, but now even more so, that our lives are so worthless and so completely meaningless. And for the almost 200 people who were killed, and they were murdered, they're not martyrs, these people were murdered by their own state. There was no remembrance, no honoring of their lives, nothing. It's as if they were never here. Some of the posters and some of the images that people put up, and probably family members and loved ones, I was thinking the other day that, they're going to be swept away with the first rainfall. And then with that, their memory will be completely erased from our minds, or from our collective memory, basically, of these almost 200 people who died. And that just makes one feel, or that makes me feel, that my life has no value and no worth.
It reminds me of I forgot the name of the writer, but he describes what we call the post-war era. So since 1990, he just describes it as the second phase of the war. And I understand what he means by that. And it is more accurate, I think, at this point to really stop saying that we live in a post-war society, because I mean, I think it's been meaningless since they announced it. But this obviously wouldn't even be the first time that you would have those that are quote unquote missing, that are not being found on purpose. We have those that are from the war, and I spent a lot of time interviewing and speaking to families of those that have been quote unquote disappeared, and mafudin. And we've developed an entire lingo, an entire vocabulary as a society, either as a coping mechanism, as a denial mechanism, or a combination of all of the above, I'm sure, that has actually made it even more difficult to describe what's happening, even when it's happening in front of us. And August 4th, to me, August 4th, 6 or 8 p.m., now we all know the date, the time of when it happened, for me was that moment as well where I asked myself within like 2-3 days of when it happened. I was under the shock of when it happened, but I guess because I'm not in Beirut, I was able to ask that question 2-3 days later instead of like 2 months later, maybe. I asked myself, like, how will this be a repetition of previous explosions or previous bombs or previous sizable or seismic, I should say, events of this sort that have taken so many lives so quickly? And unfortunately, I could name a few, and in my mind anyway. And this is of course, they were of a different nature in the sense that the other ones were military attacks, whether by foreign power or by the militias or whatever. Whereas this was not in a direct attack, but as you said, this is still an attack. This is still uh, I agree in calling this attempted murder. I mean, mass murder. And then since then, it's also been a series of attempted murders. And words fail me, to be totally honest with you. At this juncture in time where we are right now in this moment, words have for me anyway, personally, words have reached their limit. I don't know how to describe the same thing essentially over and over again.
Right, I think, at this point it's just become, it's either them or us. But there is no way we can continue to, let's say, coexist the way we have been. Because, these people are out to kill us, they're out to get us. And unless we elevate our type of resistance and the types of actions that we can engage in, I think we're gonna, inevitably lose this battle. But this time, the loss of this battle, its consequences are going to be much more brutal and much more deadly. So right now we're confronted with this very, very harsh reality, that unless we take some kind of very decisive and collective action to push back and to resist, and it's essentially become a fight for our lives. Because if they continue to rule this country the way they have been, it's impossible for us to live with any kind of dignity, without even the most basic needs met. And as we were talking before about the crumbling infrastructure of this country, whether it's the health sector or the education sector, everything is collapsing around us. And right now we're going to be faced with two scenarios. Either we turn against each other, which I think is the most likely scenario, and we're going to see people fighting with each other, either in a different geographies or on a sectarian basis and so on and so forth, or we unleash all of our power and all of our rage against this ruling class. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there are any prospects for this second scenario to happen. and people are already starting to turn on each other. And it's become just a question of survival, and we're in this constant state of survival mode, unfortunately.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better, to be honest. What are something? I'll wrap it up on my side, and then I'll just leave you the floor. What are some things that listeners that are listening to this episode can sort of expect from the public source in the near future, that are more or less, things that you guys are already working on, and how can they actually get involved, and how can they support, the usual stuff that I would end these episodes with. Obviously, any relevant links that we mentioned, I will put them in the associated blog post on the website. But besides that, what should they know about?
So yeah, we're very excited about a series of investigations that my colleague Karim Shayib has been leading on for the Chronicles of the Crisis. So these have been in the works for quite a few months, and over the next few weeks we're going to start publishing them. So we're very excited about that development. I'm very excited about this short video that we've produced. Hopefully the first of many, possibly titled PS Shorts, but we're not 100% sure on the name yet. And these short clips are supposed to be, or they will be for the most part, documentary style, meant to do some type of immersive storytelling. We're starting pretty small and experimenting a little bit with these types of videos. We've produced 2 so far, one in Birj Hammoud on the landfill, and another one in the aftermath of the Beirut explosion. As far as how people can support us, just read our material, share it. If you're outside of Lebanon and you'd like to donate, we have a donation page. If you have an uncle or an auntie or whatever neighbor who works in a government administration and they have access to potentially interesting documents or information, just relay to others that we have a whistleblowing platform, and that people can share vital information with us, and we won't even know their identity. Not even us are able to know who is sharing this information with us. Otherwise, thank you so much for hosting this conversation, Joey.
No, honestly, Lara, it's been my pleasure. As I said, I will redirect listeners towards the relevant links as well. And you take care of yourself. Like, this is already extremely difficult to deal with, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Joey. It was lovely being on your show.